Alexander Mackenzie was Canada's second Prime Minister and the first Liberal Prime Minister. Like Sir John Macdonald, Mackenzie came from Scotland, but the similarities don't go much further than that. Where Macdonald was a flashy, fast-talking lawyer, Mackenzie was a more plain man who worked with his hands and was more interested in heavy lifting than heavy drinking. Where Macdonald had a beer, Mackenzie had a beard. Alexander Mackenzie was born on January 28, 1822, in Perthshire, Scotland. He was the third of 10 sons. He had bright red hair and piercing blue eyes. When Mackenzie was 13, his father died, which forced him and his two older brothers to drop out of school and work to support the family. Mackenzie became a journeyman stonemason and ended up falling in love with a young woman named Helen Neal. In 1842, he paid £3 to board a ship and followed Helen and her family across the Atlantic to the newly united Upper and Lower Canada. He enjoyed the trip from Montreal to Kingston.
We was towed by a steamboat, and we had plenty of time at the locks to examine the country.
Mackenzie first lived in Kingston and worked as a stonemason and contractor. Although the rocks here were too hard for the masonry tools he'd brought from Scotland, he managed to work on a variety of buildings and save up his money. He and Helen got married, and Mackenzie helped pay for the rest of his family to move to Canada. Together they moved to Sarnia, another mainly Scottish city in Upper Canada. Alexander Mackenzie got involved in politics thanks in part to George Brown, a Liberal newspaper owner. George Brown, one of Sir John Macdonald's biggest enemies, became Mackenzie's guiding light. Mackenzie's life, like Macdonald's, had periods of tragedy. He and Helen had 3 children, but only one daughter survived past infancy. Helen died in 1852, and Mackenzie remarried in 1853 to Jane Sim. He wrote about how much he missed her when she was away.
I was crying. I use a handkerchief daily. I think of using a towel after this for economical reasons. If you stay away long, it may become a sheet.
Because you know what they say, big beard, big heart. Alexander Mackenzie was a hard-working, religious, family-oriented man who never drank. He wasn't flashy or fancy, but he was respected. He was able to look at a job and find a solution, and tell people how to do it clearly and simply. He wanted nothing to do with celebrity culture. When people were talking about Edward Hanlon, a famous rower, Mackenzie said the sport was an
utterly useless trial of strength.
And if Hanlon had been
cutting and splitting wood, hoeing corn, ploughing, or any other useful occupation which would be of general benefit to mankind, I could have some sympathy with the excitement.
Even though he was a politician, we can think of one person who might call him a friend. Alexander Mackenzie was elected MP of Lambton in 1867 as part of the Liberal Party. When George Brown eventually stepped down as Liberal leader, Mackenzie reluctantly took his place. 9 months later, the Pacific scandal broke out, and the Governor-General, Lord Dufferin, had Mackenzie form a new government. Lord Dufferin wasn't exactly thrilled about it, calling Mackenzie a
poor creature.
But the Liberals went on to win the 1874 election. Other Liberal members resented Mackenzie, thinking they would have been better, and Sir John A. had made a rule that English-speaking prime ministers needed a French partner. Mackenzie didn't have one. Canada was entering a major economic depression. Unemployment was high, farmers were hungry, and the treasury was low. Mackenzie never tried to hide this or downplay it, though. He said,
"The truth must be told. I have no faith in pretension of any sort."
Mackenzie looked to save money by putting off construction of the Transcontinental Railway, and his decision was very unpopular in British Columbia. Mackenzie may have felt that, with the population of Western Canada so low compared to the East, he didn't have to focus on their needs. Liberals from outside of Ontario didn't fully trust Mackenzie, feeling that he focused too much on Ontario. Mackenzie had a lot of trouble forming his cabinet. Only 5 people kept the same post for his 5 years as Prime Minister, and he was one of them. Alexander Mackenzie served as his own Minister of Public Works, but he exhausted himself. There was simply too much on his plate. Mackenzie was able to accomplish several important things. The Dominion's Election Act introduced secret ballots, ensured elections in all ridings took place on the same day, and removed some property requirements for candidates. Before this, elections were conducted by people shouting out their vote, and ridings could vote days apart from each other, allowing defeated candidates to run again somewhere else. Mackenzie regulated and reduced some postage prices, and expanded door-to-door mail delivery from Montreal to all major cities in Canada. He established the Supreme Court of Canada in 1875, which was an important step in Canada gaining independence in decision-making from Britain. And in the Northwest Territories Act, Mackenzie brought together laws for the territories and created a practical constitution for them. Alexander Mackenzie also passed legislation for the Royal Military College of Canada to be opened in Kingston, and to this day it serves as the Military College of the Canadian Armed Forces. Mackenzie did not really enjoy being Prime Minister. He couldn't play the political games he was expected to. He may have been too honest, too dedicated to his principles to compromise. Have you ever felt like none of the major political parties really fit your beliefs? That was Mackenzie's situation. He didn't fully like or agree with the Liberals or the Conservatives. He even had a secret staircase built into the Parliament buildings so he could escape without having to talk to anyone looking for favors, or worse, an interview. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Mackenzie and the Liberals lost the 1878 election by a landslide. Sir John A. Macdonald swept up public support by blaming the Depression on the Liberals and proposing a clear, new path to prosperity. Though Mackenzie still won his election to MP in Lambton by a mere 150 votes, he was no longer Prime Minister. Mackenzie remained leader of the opposition for another 2 years, but he stopped calling meetings for the Liberals. One day in 1880, the rising star of the Liberal Party, Wilfrid Laurier, came into Mackenzie's office with 4 other party members. They had come in to make Mackenzie step down as party leader. Laurier said,
"It is only human nature that a defeated army should seek a new general."
And so Mackenzie stepped down, saying,
"From this time forth, I will speak and act for no person but myself."
This became all too true when in 1882 he began to lose his voice, though he continued to serve as an MP for the rest of his life. He died after a stroke on April 17, 1892, 10 months after Sir John A. Macdonald. But unlike almost every other Prime Minister in Canada, Mackenzie had no state funeral. Outside of Sarnia and Toronto, it almost seemed as though people had forgotten that he was ever Prime Minister at all. So what did it all add up to? Was Alexander Mackenzie a success? It seems like his biggest problem was simply being, for his entire political career, in the shadow of much larger men. His 5-year term as Prime Minister was sandwiched between Sir John A. Macdonald's terms, and Sir Wilfrid Laurier rose to leadership of the Liberal Party while Mackenzie was still an MP. He was good, but that's just it. He wasn't necessarily great or as great. In almost every book we've read on Mackenzie, the authors spend more time comparing Mackenzie to Sir John A. Macdonald than actually discussing him and his achievements. And several of his achievements were quite impressive. The creation of the Supreme Court of Canada, the independent office of the Auditor General, secret ballots, these are things that exist to this day and have played a significant role in Canada's history. However, although Alexander Mackenzie was the first Liberal Prime Minister of Canada, he is relegated almost as a footnote in the history of the Liberals, a brief 5-year period of federal power during almost 30 years of Conservative control. Many of the books also spoke about how Mackenzie was like a stonemason in his term as Prime Minister. This seems an apt comparison. It's certainly been used enough. The fact that Mackenzie was able to rise to the position of Prime Minister as a man of working-class roots was amazing, especially in his time. And to this day, he holds the record for percentage of the popular vote for first-time PMs. But Mackenzie never let his various successes go to his head, and he stayed true to his values and his history. When Mackenzie was touring Fort Henry in Kingston, he asked an escort if he knew the thickness of the walls. When the escort admitted he did not, Mackenzie said,
"I do. It's 5 feet, 10 inches. I know because I built it myself."
Of the first 8 Prime Ministers of Canada, he is the only one who was not knighted. He declined it when offered. Does he suffer the same way John Adams does in comparison with George Washington? What's more memorable, your first crush or your second? Alexander Mackenzie served as Prime Minister for 5 years, and he was involved in politics for much of his adult life. He's the only Prime Minister with working-class origins and the first Liberal Prime Minister. Why might it be that Alexander Mackenzie's been overlooked by history?